Once upon a time, in a forest where the morning mist clung to the moss like silver velvet, there lived a fox named Finley. He was a clever fox with bright eyes and a quick wit. This fox had a very special talent. He had never lost an argument in his life. Finley's coat gleamed russet in the dappled sunlight. His eyes sparkled with a sharp intelligence. It was the kind of intelligence that could spot a logical flaw from 3 trees away. He was, by all accounts, remarkably clever. Perhaps he was too clever, though he would have argued otherwise. And he would have argued very, very well. The other forest dwellers had learned a lesson. They learned to avoid philosophical discussions with Finley. When the rabbits debated which warren was safest, Finley would arrive with counterpoints. His points were so sharp they could split a hair. When the deer discussed migration patterns, Finley would dismantle their reasoning. He worked with the precision of a master craftsman taking apart a watch. He was always right, and he was always alone. One crisp autumn evening, golden leaves pirouetted through the cooling air. Finley sat atop his favourite boulder. Below him, he could see the other animals gathering near the stream for their evening drink. They laughed together, their voices carried on the breeze like wind chimes. The rabbits playfully nudged each other. The deer stood in comfortable silence. Even the prickly porcupines seemed to belong. Finley descended from his perch. His intention was simple, to join them. As he approached, a young squirrel was explaining her theory. She spoke of where the best acorns could be found. The words tumbled from Finley's mouth before he could stop them. Each word was perfectly chosen. Each point was irrefutable. Within moments, he had proven the squirrel's theory flawed. He had shown her logic was incomplete. He had demonstrated her conclusions were hasty. The squirrel's tail drooped. The gathering grew quiet. One by one, they finished drinking. They drifted away into the darkening forest. Finley stood alone by the stream. He watched his reflection ripple in the water. He had won again. So why did victory taste like ashes? The next morning brought fog so thick it seemed the forest had been wrapped in cotton wool. Finley was foraging near the old oak. That is when he encountered someone new. It was a badger with silver-streaked fur. His eyes held the quiet depth of ancient wells. The badger was attempting to move a large fallen branch. It blocked the path to his burrow. Finley, always eager to demonstrate superior knowledge, began to explain. He listed the 17 reasons why the badger's approach was inefficient. The badger paused. He listened. Then he simply nodded and said nothing. He returned to his work. He adjusted his grip slightly. He took his time. Finley waited for the debate. He waited for the pushback. He waited for the defense. None came. Intrigued despite himself, Finley watched. The badger worked slowly and steadily. He cleared the path. It took longer than Finley's method would have, but something about the badger's calm persistence held Finley's attention. It was like a puzzle he could not solve. Days passed, and Finley found himself drawn again and again to the area near the badger's burrow. The badger, whose name was Bramble, never seemed bothered by Finley's presence. He simply went about his business. He built his winter stores. He reinforced his home. He watched the patterns of the forest with patient attention. Finley began to talk, as he always did. He offered observations. He offered corrections. He offered improvements. Bramble would listen with those deep, thoughtful eyes. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he smiled softly. But he rarely argued back. At first, this frustrated Finley. How could he prove his intelligence if no one challenged him? But gradually, something unexpected happened. In the absence of opposition, Finley's words began to slow. His pronouncements softened into ponderings. His corrections transformed into questions. One evening, as purple twilight painted the sky, Finley realized something. He had spent the entire afternoon sitting beside Bramble. He had not felt the need to prove a single point. They had watched the river together, and the silence had felt like music. Winter's first snow arrived like a whispered secret. It blanketed the forest in pristine quiet. Finley helped Bramble gather one last cache of roots. They worked side by side in a comfortable rhythm. As they rested afterward, Finley finally asked the question that had been growing in his mind. It was like a seed pushing towards sunlight. Why didn't Bramble ever argue back? Bramble was quiet for a long moment. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. Then he gestured toward the forest. The tracks of countless creatures crisscrossed the snow. They formed an intricate tapestry. Bramble explained gently. Each creature walked their own path through the world. Some paths were straight. Some paths wandered. Some paths doubled back. But every path had its own truth. Every path had its own reason for being. To insist that only one path was correct was to miss the beauty of the whole design. Bramble had learned, he said. He had learned that being right was far less important than being kind. He had learned that winning an argument often meant losing a friend. He had learned that the smartest creatures were not those who could prove others wrong. They were those who could make others feel heard. That night, curled in his den, Finley's sharp mind turned inward. This was perhaps the first time in his life he thought of all the arguments he had won. He thought of all the flaws he had exposed. He thought of all the logic he had wielded like a sword. He thought of the loneliness. It had grown inside him like frost creeping across a window pane. And he thought of Bramble. Bramble had taught without teaching. He had corrected without criticizing. He had offered friendship without conditions. Finley realized something now. Intelligence was knowing how to win an argument, but wisdom was knowing when not to have one. Spring arrived with an explosion of green. It was as if the forest had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Finley emerged from his den. He found the world transformed. It was not just transformed by the season. It was transformed by his own transformed eyes. When the rabbits discussed their warrens now, Finley listened more than he spoke. When he did offer thoughts, they came as suggestions rather than corrections. They were invitations rather than declarations. He discovered something new. He discovered that questions were more powerful than answers. He discovered that curiosity connected where cleverness divided. The other animals, sensing the change, began to approach him again. Conversations bloomed like wildflowers. The young squirrel, whose acorn theory he had once demolished, now sought his input, and he gave it gently. He built on her ideas rather than tearing them down. One warm evening in late spring, the animals gathered by the stream as they had done before. But this time, when Finley approached, no one drifted away. He sat among them, not apart from them. He laughed at the jokes he once would have fact-checked. He appreciated the stories he previously would have corrected. He belonged to the moment. He was not standing outside it, analyzing it. Bramble arrived late. His familiar, steady gait carried him to the water's edge. He caught Finley's eye across the gathering. He offered the smallest nod. It was a gesture of recognition between old friends. Finley understood. He had not become less intelligent. His mind was as sharp as ever. His observations were as keen. But he had learned something new. He had learned to temper intelligence with kindness. He had learned to balance being clever with being compassionate. As summer deepened, the forest hummed with abundant life. Finley discovered something remarkable. By listening more and arguing less, by seeking to understand rather than to prove, he learned things his cleverness alone could never have taught him. He learned about the rabbit's complex family bonds. He learned about the deer's ancient migration wisdom. He learned about the squirrel's intricate communication systems. Each creature, he discovered, was a library of knowledge. Each was waiting only for someone patient enough to read. And on quiet evenings, he would sit with Bramble outside the burrow. Two friends watched the forest breathe. Sometimes they talked. Often they didn't. Both were perfect. Finley had finally won something. It was more valuable than any argument. He had won the ability to see beyond being right. He had won the ability to value connection over correction. He had won the ability to understand. He understood now that the wisest creatures were not those who knew everything. They were those who knew what truly mattered. As autumn returned and the cycle completed, Finley found himself back atop his favourite boulder. But this time he was not alone. The forest creatures gathered below. They did not gather despite his presence. They gathered because of it. A young fox, sharp-eyed and eager, approached him. The young fox had a question about seasonal weather patterns. Finley recognized the hunger for knowledge in those eyes. It was the same hunger that had once consumed him. He could have dazzled the young fox. He could have offered meteorological facts and logical deductions. Instead, he smiled. He asked what the young fox had observed. He asked what patterns they had noticed. He asked what the world had taught them. And as the young fox spoke, Finley listened. He listened with the patience that Bramble had shown him. He offered the same gift he had received. He offered the gift of being heard. The stars emerged one by one. They were like thoughts appearing in the darkness of not knowing. Finley looked up at them. He was no longer trying to categorize or analyze. He was simply appreciating their distant beauty. He had learned the most important truth of all. True intelligence was not about being the smartest creature in the forest. It was about being smart enough to know. It was about knowing that wisdom began where the need to prove yourself ended. And in the quiet of that realization, surrounded by friends he had almost lost to his own cleverness, Finley finally understood. He understood what it meant to win something that truly mattered. The forest settled into night. Its creatures were at peace. They were connected by invisible threads of kindness and understanding. These threads bound them more surely than any perfect argument ever could. And somewhere in that tapestry of connection, a fox with russet fur slept deeply. His sharp mind was finally at rest. He had discovered that the greatest victory was learning when to stop fighting. Good night.